Welcome back to Intelligence at the Edge. I'm your host, Chip Usher. You know, I worked at CIA when the 9/11 attacks occurred. I was there actually at our headquarters building watching on television as planes flew into buildings in New York City and Washington, D.C. And I was living that experience of watching how the intelligence community was galvanized to completely reorganize itself and refocus itself on the global war on terrorism. And it strikes me that these days, Americans are not fully aware of the threat that our country is under every day. It's not planes flying into buildings, it's cyber attacks. We're constantly under threat from the People's Republic of China, from Russia, from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and Iran. They're launching cyber attacks that are stealing our data, stealing our personal information, in some cases, stealing intellectual property and commercial information from our companies. This is costing our economy billions of dollars, and it's positioning some of our rivals to actually execute adverse actions against us in the event of a crisis. For example, China has already penetrated public works projects or public works companies in places around the country. So recently, SCSP hosted the AI Unlock Festival, where we invited two experts on cyber, Mr. Rob Joyce and Leah Siskind, to talk to us about the evolving nature of the cyber threat environment. Rob Joyce is a former senior official with the National Security Agency and the National Security Council, and a real expert on cyber issues. And Leah Siskind is with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, who's an expert on how the axis of disruptors are using asymmetric means, including cyber and AI, against us. I hope you enjoy this recording of the panel discussion that we had in early October. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Chip Usher. I'm the Senior Advisor for Intelligence here at SCSP. I'm also the host of SCSP's latest podcast, Intelligence at the Edge, and I'm very pleased to say that the recording of this conversation today will feature in an upcoming episode of Intel at the Edge. Today's conversation is about understanding the cyber threat environment, and I couldn't think of two better people to unpack this for us. We are blessed to have Mr. Rob Joyce join us. Rob had a very distinguished career in U.S. intelligence and the cybersecurity mission. His experience provides a rare 360-degree view of the cyber problem. He served in several senior roles at the National Security Agency, including Director for Cybersecurity and also Director of the Elite Hacking Unit Tailored Access Operations. And we are very pleased to welcome Leah Siskind. Leah is a research analyst in the Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. She represents the next generation of cyber policy strategists focused on the broader geopolitical and strategic implications of cyber conflict. So welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being here and being part of our podcast.
Thank you for having us.
So let's dive right in, and I'm going to ask a question to both of you to help us kind of get a baseline. From your distinct perspectives, what is the single most significant evolution you've seen in the cyber threat environment over the past couple of years? Is it the actors, their methods, or their targets? Leah, we can start with you.
Sure. I don't have quite the history and the insight that Rob has here, but I can tell you what I'm seeing right now, and that is just how the landscape is changing and how what previously took quite a lot of expertise and experience now can be done with amateurs using very accessible tools out in the open. So I'm thinking specifically of the rise of agentic AI, where what attacks in the past might have entailed an entire network of people working in coordination now could be one person operating an autonomous network of bots. That and vibe hacking. People who might not come into an attack scenario with a set plan can come in with a goal, with an outcome that they want to achieve, and leverage just common AI tools that we all have access to kind of come up with every piece of the strategy from, they can run very sophisticated campaigns from planning to reconnaissance to even right-sizing the ransomware amount. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, vibe coding leading to vibe hacking.
Exactly.
Scary indeed. Rob, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Chip. The biggest thing I'm focused on is the morphing of the way the Chinese have targeted the U.S. and allies. It used to be intellectual property and typical espionage, but we've seen over the last couple of years the pre-positioning for destructive attacks inside critical infrastructure. And that, to me, that is crossing a Rubicon. The Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon activities that got into critical infrastructure, ISPs, but also things like pipelines, transportation facilities, energy, and communications. All of that is done with the intent to be able to have us focus domestically in the time of escalating crisis. And to me, there's a secondary word for that. That's terrorism, right? They want us afraid and looking here and not to the other side of the globe if something's going on. And, what has really struck me is how we don't treat physical and cyber threats in the same way. So if we had found, explosives strapped to pipelines,
right.
The response would have been energetic, fierce, and immediate. And here we are a couple of years later after finding deliberate attempts to disrupt pipelines. And we've taken a few small governmental actions, but we really have not rallied the way it would have been if that were physical explosives.
And with some of these recent Chinese hacks, they're still on our networks, right? Even after discovery, we haven't managed to expunge them completely. I think that's, it's terribly important. And what do you think explains the lack of urgency that you're seeing?
I don't know. It really is, do we internalize this as a true threat, right? I go to the Salt Typhoon intrusions into the cell phone carriers, right? We had the major presidential candidates hacked and information stolen. If a Chinese spy had broken into one of the cell phone switching centers and physically took a hard drive out of there, right? There would have been diplomatic actions. There would have been, PNG expulsions out of the country. There would have been dramatic responses from the White House. And here we are, months and years later, and they are still having success against our information technology. Now, granted, that is traditional espionage. I don't want to cross that into the digital explosives realm, but still, we've not seen an energetic response the way it would have been handled if these were physical spies.
So I suppose I'm going to jump to you for a second and let me tee you up in this way. I suppose part of it is the technology, but part of it is maybe the stratagems or the thought processes going on in Beijing, Moscow, Tehran. Leah, to you, how do you view our adversaries' use of cyber as part of a larger gray zone strategy?
Absolutely. But first, to go back to what you were saying, I think we really struggle in the United States when responding to attacks from what we would call axis of our adversaries or axis of disruptors, Iran, Russia, China, North Korea. We really struggle with attribution and proportionality.
Yeah, but there was no attribution problem in these.
Yeah, with Salt Typhoon?
Absolutely. Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon. It was the Chinese, and we even had intent.
Yeah, right? Then perhaps it's just too much time figuring out what is the proportionate response. But when it comes to the aims and the goals of our adversaries, each one has their own goal in attacking United States. There's China's been very clear and straightforward about their kind of intent to do economic leapfrogging. They kind of lay this out and their plan Made in China 2025, which is kind of their roadmap for theft. And if they've designated the industries where they want to excel, and so why invest in R&D when you could just steal it? It would be much more efficient. As you mentioned, a lot of this is pre-positioning for conflict. So scoping and kind of assessing all the vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure so that down the road, one day, if Taiwan is attacked, we will not be in a position to respond, or if we try to assume the position to respond, then we just shut down our utilities and distract us with something like that. A lot of it is information dominance and democratic erosion, and this is a real win-win strategy for our adversaries because they don't actually have to accomplish that much. They don't have to get someone elected or push a certain narrative. All they have to do is divide us enough against ourselves so that we lose faith and confidence in our own institutions. It is a scenario where they're able to really compete with the U.S. with very little accountability. So this is kind of like death by 1,000 cuts while we're still trying to figure out what the proportionate response is. And then lastly, it's just undermining U.S. global leadership as a whole and making democracy itself look messy and chaotic. And this can fracture alliances.
And it seems like cyber is the perfect domain because it's often below the threshold of war, right? It's somewhat hidden. Rob, having led TAO, you have a unique understanding, shall we say, of the offense side of the ball. What is the single biggest misconception that defenders, and I'm thinking here of companies as well as government, have about the sophistication that an attacker brings to executing a cyber campaign?
Yeah, I think it's not generally realized that attackers are weak and lazy. They will not expend energy they don't have to do. So, you hear about elaborate 0 days that are the skeleton key into networks. They never start there. They don't need to use those if you have weak passwords, if you don't have multi-factor authentication, if you don't have your patching and controls up to snuff. So, there's this least common denominator of the effort I need to do to get in and win, and that's what they're going to expend. So, if in the end there's this really elaborately defended hard target that is very important to get to, the advanced persistent threats will spend the time to get there eventually. But for the most part, they don't need to, right? We don't do a good enough job doing the basics. And the attackers will, I've talked about this for years, they will know the network better than the people who designed it and better than the people who defend it, because they put in the work. And so that is the big takeaway I have is you as defenders need to put in the work to sweat the small details, because the attackers are going to probe and assess your network looking for the things that are on the network as implemented, not as you intended. I intended to have all the patching done, but I don't know about these 2 servers over here that somebody put on the network 4 years ago, have retired, and they don't know it's there, right? The attackers will find those things, whereas the defenders need to have the holistic understanding and sweat the details.
Leah, you've talked about defense forward as a concept. Can you kind of explain what that is, and how does the United States employ it effectively without risking unintended escalation?
This is a challenging time, and as you mentioned, you can often achieve a lot with kind of the lowest common denominator vulnerabilities, and AI just gives everyone the ability to go after those at a much more extreme scale. When you think about the ability to assess vulnerabilities in a system, how much easier AI will make that, and when uncovering troves of leaked passwords and sensitive information, how much easier you can sift through that with AI. Another thing that we haven't really talked about at all, but which goes to our basic sense of trust in institutions, is the rise of deepfakes. And I find it very interesting how every different adversary is using it for a different goal. Mm-hmm. Some are using it just to instill fear and erode trust. Others are using it to access sensitive intel. Others use it to destabilize alliances, and others use it for just straight up financial gain. And one thing we haven't talked about at all is just, simple North Korean style.
Right, their focus tends to be on theft.
Exactly. So, using AI, especially deepfakes, to perpetrate this whole North Korean worker scam where they're trying to penetrate American IT companies just to earn a lot of money and kind of fund the North Korean war machine. But they're very cutting edge in their use of AI to kind of just deceive and for financial exploitation. But this is very, like, all of these strategies are very effective, and they're extremely cheap and easy to run right now. This is one of the top areas of concern is, a couple months ago we saw information about Secretary Rubio having these deepfake audio conversations with other world leaders and members of Congress. And this is something that you can do very simply with very easily accessible, cheap tools. With about 30 seconds of recorded audio of someone's voice, you can pretty much capture their essence. That combined with kind of normal phishing attacks to gain access to an agency's information and lingo, it's pretty easy to put on a compelling front that you are that person. So they're all using kind of deep fakes in different ways, and this is something I'm particularly concerned about.
So it just seems that these days, every month, every other month, there's some new prominent hack or deep fake scam that's exposed. It seems sort of continuous. And Rob, you've already talked about some of the more notorious recent attacks: Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon, Solar Winds, the attacks on Microsoft that have occurred repeatedly over the years. It just seems sort of increasing in pace and scope. And a question for you both is sort of the U.S. government's posture still seems to be rather reactive. I'm sure we're not privy to everything that's going on behind the scenes, but is there a need for a defense forward or a new type of strategy or concept of operations to push back on this sort of stuff?
Yeah, so my answer would be yes and, right? I do believe that, the defend forward strategy that Cybercom developed is really important, right? The idea that adversaries, whether they're criminal or nation state, get to keep trying over and over again until they win, that's a losing formula, right? But by the same token, I don't believe, having been inside offensive cyber and defensive cyber, that you can cyber your way out of the problem, right? You do need to add friction so that the adversaries don't get the opportunity and don't have the advantage. But like, in the case of the Chinese, they've had tremendous success, and our response to that has not been to, they have impressive cyber, we're going to stop our cyber programs, right? It has been a call to action and a need to do more. So, what I really believe is we need to think about these things in terms of national security threat and decide that they are worthy of national security tools, all elements of national power, right? The one time we saw the Chinese back down a bit for a while was, when President Obama personally engaged Xi after the OPM hacks and some other, intellectual property theft causes. So, what is that moment? And, if Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon weren't that for our leadership right now, I don't know what crosses that threshold. But we have all of these other tools that when a nation, breaks a red line, and we want to express our displeasure and get them to stop, that is what we use for deterrence, right? We're not going to deter with a cyber operation. We're going to have to deter with the strength and might in totality of the U.S. government.
Great point.
I think there's obviously a huge role for the government to play here, and we know all the appropriate offices. Unfortunately, many of them have been gutted in the past couple of months, so we're already at a disadvantage there. But going beyond government, we need to it's critical to have very open communication channels between the private sector and government in identifying and responding to threats. But going beyond that, I think we kind of need to start thinking about having a comprehensive, whole of society approach to trust and verifying that things are real. So when I started looking into deepfakes, I kept thinking of seeing what's the right tool, what's the right way to prove that something is fake. And I think we'll quickly reach a point where that kind of becomes impossible to do, and we'll have to think more strategically about how do we prove that something is real, and how do we create the right protocols within companies, within agencies to kind of verify that what you're...
And perhaps market incentives, right?
Yeah.
I think people generally value truthiness over lies and fakes.
Yeah.
But great point. So here we are at the SCSP AI Unlocked Festival. People are very interested in AI. It's all over the news. Perhaps there's even a little hype about AI. So let's kind of cut to the chase and get your views on how AI, and you've talked about this already a little bit with regard to deepfakes, but how are our adversaries using AI in a malicious way against us? And on the flip side, are there some opportunities for our defenders to be using AI in some innovative ways to protect us? Leah, do you want to start?
Oh, they're using it in so many different ways. And some of this we've kind of spoken to already. The ease and the ability to create information campaigns and influence operations, how easy it is to kind of spin up like a fake news site that seems very similar to something you see at home. Like I heard a couple weeks ago about how the Russians are growing more concerned about the coalition of the willing. This is the European countries that are kind of pushing support behind Ukraine and offering to send in peacekeeping troops in the future if there is a ceasefire. And so the Russians created, or Russian affiliated propaganda groups put out like fake news stories revealing a secret map that the French and the British had conceived together that was showing Ukraine cut up into pieces, and this is actually their plan for recolonizing Ukraine, something ridiculous. The whole purpose is they just want to destabilize this alliance, and it's very easy to start flooding the zone with misinformation or disinformation here about getting Ukrainians to start distrusting like the Europeans really have their back. Something like that could take very little effort, very little money, and it's very vastly beneficial.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Chip, on the technical side, what we're seeing is, the exponential improvement in the hacking tools that are able to be launched and run by agentic AI. So, a couple examples. There's a service out there where you can get a company to run bug bounties to find flaws and misconfigurations in your company's network. So a company called HackerOne will crowdsource people to come and test your security. They vet these people in advance, and then they offer money for every flaw you find and turn in that gets verified. And they've done this successfully for a number of years. And they also socially engineer their population of hackers. They create a leaderboard, and they talk about who's had the most bounties and the most money accumulated as bounties. And for the last 4 or 5 months, the number one hacker on this leaderboard is now an agentic AI bot, right? It is Expo. And, it shows that, they can outperform the human hackers. Why? Because they're relentless. They're operating 24/7. If you need more capacity, me as a human hacker can't clone myself, but I can spin up 10 more servers and they can all do the same thing in parallel. And so that's what you're going to see. Leah talked about scope and scale, right? We're going to have AI operating at scope and scale where it can walk through every digital neighborhood there is, jiggle the doorknob, and see if it's properly locked. And that's here today, right? They're only going to get better. And so, we're up against that, and that goes to my point earlier of defenders have to know all the details, right? And so that's the good side now. We can start to use these agentic tools to go check our locks every minute, every hour, to make sure that our digital domain is locked down. The other thing that AI is doing well is we've moved to an era where there's not nearly as much malware, custom created malware being used. We've gotten better at antivirus, and the technical term in the community now is EDR, the endpoint detection and response. Those look for a specific program that is operating inside your server or your network or on your PC. AI can now spin up so many variants. It can take a piece of malware and create a custom one that would only be used once to target Chip. And so there's no chance for Leah to find that malware with the same signature that's on Chip's device because it's unique, right? It is a one-off, used one time and thrown away. So now what we're finding is, this ability to generate unique malware, but also it's much more likely that instead of getting malware, they're interested in just getting access to your account. becoming Chip and having your permissions inside your organization to do the things, the data gathering and the exfiltration that they need. And what AI offers now is the ability to learn and characterize what you do in your daily life. You use these 4 online services, you go to these sites, you go to this server, you move this much data, you move this kind of data, and now whenever you do anything outside that pattern, it can be flagged. So I think agentic defenses to constantly red team and examine the state of our security, and the pattern matching to find when things deviate from the norm so that it can be flagged, stopped, investigated. I think those are 2 powerful tools that we'll get as defenders on the AI side.
Terrific.
Chip, can I have one more
Please.
positive note? I ran the bug bounty at the first bug bounty at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and you are quite right. In the community the hacker community we worked with, the top hacker was an AI. However, they are the most persistent. However, they were the best at finding low-level P5 bugs. When we found who was able to find the most high priority, most critical findings, that was always done by humans. And so I think having human security researchers and augment their abilities with AI, that's like unstoppable.
Yeah, my takeaway from all of the AI is those who use AI will outperform those who don't, right? And whether you're on defense or offense, right? And that's exactly your case, Leah.
Well, I like the idea of ending on a positive note, given all the scary stuff that we were talking about at the beginning of this talk. Thank you both so much, and we really appreciate the in-depth conversation today. Rob, Joyce, Leah Siskind, thank you.
Thanks, Chip.